I think most folks would probably just focus on a single species in the talk rather than a whole family, but since these are not commonly kept, and honestly, when you find these animals in the wild, you tend to find multiple species in the same water source that cares about the same. So we're going to cover all the Homalopsidae readily available in captivity today. So if you're not aware, Homalopsidae is its own family. It's an aquatic snake family found in Southeast Asia, 57 species across 29 genera. They're all rear-fanged other than one that is not available in the trade, so really doesn't apply here, and they're all life-bearing, so there's no incubation talk in this one, which keeps it a little simple. All right, so we've been working with Homalopsids since 2003, and for that whole time, most of that time, we've used the traditional method. And I'm not using the royal we here. That'd be weird. As some of you know, I work in television. I'll be gone for 6 months at a time, so it'd be improper not to give credit to my wife, who takes care of them about half the time. And then we also have 3 different volunteers that help at various capacities while I'm away. So we is the whole group of us, because I need help to hobby. All right, so we've successfully bred 5 species of Homalopsidae. Homalopsis buctata, which is the puff-faced water snake, probably the one you see most often. Homalopsis nigroventralis, which we'll be talking about in a bit. I believe we have the only breeding group of that, but hopefully we'll be able to establish more babies. I never like being the only one with a breeding group of an animal, because if something goes wrong for me, well, then they're gone. Hypscopus plumbea, which is the plumbus or rice paddy snake, used to be in hydrus. Some of you might be more familiar with that. And Hydrus subtaeniata, and then Erpeton tentinaculum, which is probably the one you all want to hear about the most, the tentacled snakes, but I'm actually going to only touch on those briefly, and I'll explain why later. And I've already mentioned the other species, but we are also working with subsessor Bocourti, or the Bocourt's water snake, Cerberus schneideri, and those 2 we have not yet captive bred, and Hydrus subtaeniata. So this is just kind of a look at some of our herp room. We have 2 separate herp rooms, and then a 3rd bathroom that's my water processing room. There's also a couple enclosures in the bedroom, so this is not all of them, this is just some of them, kind of a look at what it looks like. If you're wondering why I have almost black walls, it's because if you're running tanks with lights, that causes less reflection back into the tank, so I can observe them a little better by having those walls darked out. All right, so as you're aware, this family is really poorly represented in the hobby due to the reputation being difficult to keep. And that's not entirely inaccurate, because when they come in, they often look a bit like this: emaciated, fungal infection. Unfortunately, those animals are not going to make it. I often have people saying, hey, I got these animals in, can you try to recover them? I say, sure. They send them to me, and you know, honestly, there's times where they're in this situation, and these animals are too far past to save. All right, so the traditional method was perfect water. I've wasted so much money on the traditional method. Does it work? Yeah, if you keep the water completely perfect all of the time with absolutely no sneezes and you know, no one lights a candle in the wrong room, it works. But it's a fragile system that has its drawbacks because A, you spend thousands of dollars in filtration and reactors and different media, and B, it's just not reflective of their natural habitat. So I've had the opportunity to see this family of snakes on 16 different trips in I think 5 or 6 different countries, and this is what they live in. Really gross water you probably wouldn't want to go in. In fact, the most Homalopsids I've ever seen at once, we lost count at 386 snakes. Those were all Cerberus. We were looking for Granulatus, but we didn't find those. We also found Fordonia in this water. Typically, if you find one species, you'll find a few. And when you find them in those kinds of numbers. This particular area is outside of Jakarta, which is a huge city. And the sewage went right into this ocean bay. Next door, a crematorium, which is also putting its waste into the water. So it's a mix of like poop and dead people. But we lost count, and we probably saw close to 600, because at that point we're like, let's just stop counting the Cerberus because we're not going to be able to keep track of this. The second most I've ever seen was in the village of Bocourt, Indonesia, and a few hours away from Jakarta, and that was a village that had kind of hole toilets, and they just dug a trench that went down the road, and it fell into this kind of cistern. And that cistern was full of Homalopsis buctata and Anhydrus and Hydrus. I told a friend about this because she wanted to see them as well, so she went in the water, and then subsequently was hospitalized for 4 days from that little nasty pool. So we've always been pursuing perfection, but when you look for them, it's actually imperfection that they seem to thrive in. So with that observation, I started going for imperfect. All right, so there's a new way. That photo on the left, yeah, that's a great photo of me, I think. That's our tannin bucket. So I mentioned that I've overtaken our 3rd bathroom, so you know if there's too many guests, you're going to have to wait. But this tannin bucket's a 65-gallon drum, and that little kind of screen thing coming up, that's a mantis tank. And inside there, I keep my botanicals, which I'll go over on the next slide. But basically, it's always brewing. It's always stewing. It's always got kind of a biome of bacteria that's in there. And this is my top-off water. I mix that with RODI water, because if it was just this, you couldn't observe the snakes. And that's the only drawback of tannins, is if they get too dark, you can't see what's going on. And you do need to monitor them. And then for filtration, I'm using these sponge filters. Oh, I didn't know audio was on. That might be a problem later. And it's literally just an air drive sponge filter. Every month or so, you squeeze it out, give it to your vegetable garden. They love it, and that's it. Okay, so embrace the tin. You could take a quick cell phone photo of this because I can't go over all of it because I got a few species to cover. Indian almond is the most documented in terms of antifungal properties. However, different leaves provide different color. The most important thing is the tannins are developed after the leaves have fallen off the tree. If you use green leaves, that's going to add a lot of sugars to the water, and that's not a good environment for things to survive in. But things like dried banana leaves, guava leaves, magnolia, oak. Now with magnolia and oak, I like to mix those actually as a substrate in the tank because they do not break down quickly, whereas the Indian almond and even soursop tea bags will go into that tannin bucket I showed before. And if everyone got their picture, the last one on there is decaf tea. That was a common one, and I've done some side-by-sides to see how the tannins work, and that's probably my least favorite, but it's a good emergency backup. All right. Okay, so the first one we're going to is the easiest one, the rice paddy snakes. These animals are about 10 inches long on average, the females being much larger than the males. And a funny thing about them is they pretty much breed all the time. They're also the most inclined to eat carrion. So the rest of them like to chase fish around, but rice paddy snakes, well, when the water lowers, they opportunistically will eat those dead fish. So the nice thing about those is like, can I get a homalopsid to take frozen thawed? The answer is absolutely. These guys do great on frozen thawed. So if you want a snake that you don't have to pay to take care of, find out what day your local fish store gets their fish in. They're guppies. Guppies are great. Freeze them, feed them. They'll give you the dead ones for free. You don't have to pay to feed it. I will make a note here. Thymidase is an issue in homalopsids, but it varies species to species. I know some keepers that have keeping homalopsis on goldfish their entire life, but then you start getting low reproductive rates and neurological issues. So one misnomer is that minnows are much different than goldfish. The fact is the entire Sopranidae family, the carp family, all contain varying levels of thymidase, so you want to go for live bears, mollies, platies, guppies, things like that. Tilapia are also a great option, but check your local restrictions because in some states it's different. In California, we can have Mozambique tilapia, but we can't have any of the others. So obviously look at what you can get. Another option is South American cichlids. Sometimes you'll see South American cichlids cheap. They can handle the tannins. I don't recommend African cichlids because they like hard water. And obviously RODI plus leaves isn't hard water and those fish are not going to thrive. One of the things I love about homalopsids is you're not feeding them like you would any other snake where you put it in and they are eating it right away. The food is always with them, so they naturally hunt, which is fun to observe. Another fun thing is you could put in fish in the tanks that aren't their food items. If they're too big or too small, they'll leave them alone. So you get some fun cohabitants. You can also add crustaceans and crabs. So one fun observation about these guys, though, here's one of our little babies. And this is how we feed the babies. Now, I know one question would probably be, do you have any problems with them eating each other? This is an animal that occurs in really huge densities when you find them. You'll go to one pond and find nothing, another pond find nothing, another pond find nothing, go, man, I flew all the way to Vietnam for no reason, and then jackpot. There's tons of rice paddies and puff face, and they're everywhere. I've actually never had a baby come to the point where it's a problem. When they both end up with the same fish, they usually freak out and go the other direction. I can only assume that because they occur in such high densities, they're just naturally not inclined to eat each other. We do observe them when we feed them just to be careful, but several years we've not ever run into that as a problem. Okay, so this is my rice paddy baby bog. I will say the hardest part about breeding these animals is often the babies are very small, very fragile, and getting them established is not easy. However, this system works very well for them, and I actually now have several people with an exact system with offspring to make sure it wasn't just my place. I baseline heat my herp room with a day to night gradient temperature, and then I have aquatic heaters in the larger aquariums. This one does not. This is literally just DG, potting soil, some cocoa peat, some leaves, a tiny air stone that half the time is barely working at all, and a lot of plants and lights. That's all they need. And then I'm literally feeding them frozen dead fish. This is one of the simplest animals to take care of, and they have this reputation that they're impossible to keep, but in actuality, it doesn't get much lower maintenance than rice paddy snakes. All right, and this is a photo that my friend replicated my technique. He added a heat lamp for heat. One nice thing about this also low filtration method is you do get some temperature gradient. It's not a major temperature gradient, but it's slightly more on one side or the other, and you'll see the animals utilizing that, which is kind of interesting. When you have filtration, it kind of homogenizes, but when the heater is on just one side, you do to get a bit more gradient. And in this example, Luke used a heat lamp. Really quick, this is the adult tank, so this paludarium. I didn't think they'd use the stick space because there's not a whole lot of documentation that they do. But it turns out when one does, they all kind of go up on the sticks. They almost have this group behavior. And they don't do it every night, but they do occasionally. So it's been nice to see that, and now I'm adding the top space for all of them. The main reason I use these kind of wasted space tanks is it allows me to grow more pothos and other plants that provide nitrate extraction. One note, I don't do water changes anymore. I clean the filter, the plants extract nitrates. You want that settled biome. So the more you're disturbing and the more you're changing the chemistry, the more you're disrupting what actually meets stasis. Think of it like an acropora coral tank. You need stability. You don't need perfection, you need stability. That extra space allows the plants to grow, and one thing a lot of people don't understand is yes, plants extract nitrate when they're in a growth cycle, but once they hit the top of the tank and they stop growing, they've lost that purpose. So having it tall and being able to trim it allows for that to continue. Puff-faced water snakes, the colorful ones. You've probably seen a lot of morph of these, and they come in a lot of morphs. These are a lot of fun. They're slightly larger. You could see big ones that are about up to 1 meter. They're also very dimorphic. Sexing puff-faced water snakes is super easy. After about a year, the males develop kind of spines by their tail, so you just run that through your fingers, and if it's rough towards the tail, that's a boy. That's it. They cohab nice. However, I do separate my males from females because occasionally they will breed to the point the male is losing weight. So, this is the one species of aquatic snake that I often separate just to make sure that they're in good condition. All of these animals will breed year-round. They can store sperm and they can multi-parent. So copulation is just a thing all the time. And some of them will drop babies multiple times a year. All right, so the known morphs are what we assume is T-negative albino, T-positive albino, something they're calling a caramel albino that looks different than either of them. Not sure, we're still trying to prove that out. Hypomelanistic, aberrant, melanistic, leucistic, calico, and matrix. And to my knowledge, calico and matrix are not in the United States yet, but they're being captive bred overseas. All right, and here's some more pictures of morphs. You can see the aberrant animal in the upper right, an albino, the hypomelanistic, and then another form of albino. How these albinos interact, we're still proving out. All right, going to give you a quick build of a 40-gallon breeder that I'll keep an individual animal in. It's in fast forward because I work fast and I talk fast and everything's fast. Not really. The cork, there's a little bit of shelter, simple pond foam, lighting grate. You might be wondering, it's a fully aquatic snake. Why are you building a deck? The deck is at an angle so it doesn't take from water space. They don't use that. It does give me planting space, but I call that the communication platform. When homalopsids are feeling ill, whether it's a fungal infection or what have you, they beach themselves. So this beach is so they can tell me, hey, I'm not feeling great. Most of the time, like I said, you never see them use it. But if you don't have it available, you won't know when something's going wrong. So I always offer them a platform that pretty much goes unused. And this is just a 40-gallon breeder, substrate sponge, and I'll show you, this is as it's growing in. Those seeds are off Amazon. I think they were like $8, and they grow in nicely. I'll show you what it looks like today. So there it is, all grown in. There is a large snake in here, but you know, I always tell you, if you could see the snakes easily, you're not doing it right. These are secretive animals that do not like being seen. So have lots of hides. If you come in there at night with a flashlight, which is how I observe them, then they'll be active and fine. But you don't give them hides, they're gonna stress. This is not a racking animal. And this is a very bioactive kind of setup here. There are some Malaysian apple crabs. You could put Neocardina shrimp in here. You can have fun with it because all these other cohabitants do well with them. Okay, this is another example of a setup. You might have seen this on my Facebook. I called it the shallows. Again, I'm gonna move really fast. I'm a really fast worker. So this is just the pink foam board you can pick up at Home Depot. It does not get fungus, doesn't rot, holds up great. And what I was doing here was saying, what if I built a tank with both shallows and depth? They do better in shallower water. But will they use that? What I found was they did primarily stay in the shallows, but they will hunt in the depth. So giving them availability is kind of neat to see. And if you have the space for it, go for it. So this is Buddy Road's vertical concrete. It's a little bit malleable after you set it in place. The only note is you have to do about 20 water changes after about a month-long cure to make sure it doesn't leak alkalinity. And then you can see the substrate in this one actually is not the peat sand mix, but it's fluval stratum. The nice thing about fluval stratum is it creates a natural acid buffer about 6.0 pH. There are other similar products, but fluval stratum is known for having the lowest pH of those aquatic planting medias. And another good note is it does tend to have an ammonia bloom at first. Do not set up your homalopsid tank the same week you get it. I usually set them about 2 months in advance. I always have a few tanks already set up with nothing in them, just so they have time to establish. You get through that weird period and get that active biome that seems to be very preventative of the fungal issues. You want it to be established, you want it to be stable. All right, so this is an interesting one. We started working with a few years ago and just produced the first captives this year. I don't know anyone else working with these, but when they breed, they do tend to do it in multiple males on the same female. These ones are cohabitant, and we've seen absolutely no issues with that. This does make you nervous. You're always like, they're going to drown each other. And I've spent many hours watching them going, please don't drown each other, please don't drown each other. I've never had it happen. That does not help my anxiety. I probably need Xanax. But these are an interesting species, and we're hoping to get these more established. And here's the babies. They're actually really pretty and quite adorable. They have really stark patterning when they're young, and that kind of fades with age. All right, and there's an adult. A little more keel than you're used to seeing on your puff-faced water snake. And interesting thing about these is, like the rice paddies, their personality is a little variable. I have individuals that you go in the room and they just scatter right away, and I've got individuals that will come up and take a fish from your hand. So it varies individual to individual, and the same is true with the rice paddies. I've got one that's just so bold, he swims right up when you come in the room going, feed me, and the rest are like, oh, that guy's here, let's hide. So, all right. Another way to set them up is super shallow. So this works great for younger Homalopsis and younger Hypsicopsis. Basically the same substrate mix, sponge filter, light, and lamp. But in this example, you can see I don't have any aquatic plants. Instead, I've opted for pothos and Swiss cheese monstera. Again, the trick is it has to keep growing. Another great option is sweet potato. I hate sweet potato as a food, okay? It's my least favorite thing on the planet. I would rather eat some Yasuni ladies, drink her spit alcohol than eat sweet potatoes. However, if you take a sweet potato and let it grow, that stuff grows like crazy, and it's great for nitrate extraction, and it's almost free. You're talking about the end of the sweet potato. Just take my portion and grow a plant out of it because I don't want it. But those are some options. All right, so there's another example where most of the plant life is actually just pothos on the top, and this is for my puff-faced water snakes. This works well because of the homalopsids, they can be bulldozers sometimes. You know, they will see a fish and they'll chase it around, they'll start ripping stuff out, and again, we want stability, we don't want that stirring. So this tank is an option where it's a pothos type setup. And you can't see the land area in this one, but in this one, it's in the back corner. So I have some that are back the wall, some in the back corner, just the observation deck's kind of hidden in this one. All right, Bocourt's water snakes. These have become a personal favorite. We've yet to produce them. I have 2 more adults coming in about a week. These are a very large homalopsid, but they're also a very curious homalopsid. Dare we say outgoing. I was trying to take a picture of this thing on the plate, and it just pulled the rosy boa on me and kept crawling towards me. I would have gotten frustrated, but at the same time, how can you get frustrated with a goofy little guy like that? And that's Alien Baby. I don't name the snakes, she does. All right, now one thing about Bocourts is they are crummy feeders. Not that they don't try to feed, but I'm not sure why they're still on this planet. You'll see in the bottom left corner there, that little green pellet, that's a Hikari algae sinking wafer. You might be wondering why I use that rather than just fish flakes. Well, if you feed the fish in the same spot every single time, they learn where that spot is. And the snakes learn where that spot is, which allows you to observe if they're actually feeding and gives them a little hand since, as you'll see in a second, they are not good hunters. And these are common mollies there. Great feeder fish, live bears. If you have a tank of 100 and you only have a few snakes, you can probably produce your own feeders pretty easily. All right, Here's one in the wild in Cambodia. Like I said, I've gone to these animals' natural habitat multiple times to make observations for the care. And the only drawback of Bocourt's water snakes is their size. So there's an adult right there. That is a large, girthy animal. And you do need a large enclosure for them because large size means lots of waste, and you don't want to have so much waste where you're destroying the cycle entirely. Here's another example. She's a biggin. Another thing to keep in mind, the fish size that snake needs to eat, you better have readily available non-goldfish feeders of that size to maintain this animal. Again, they're really cool animals. Among the homalopsids, they're less likely to bite, they're less likely to musk, and in the hand they feel like a mud snake, very muscular, thick animals. Incredible animals, but they do have a high feed bill, and they do need a large enclosure. This was when we put Alien Baby in her tank. She has since never used that platform, but she's just kind of observing her new kingdom, which has a pond foam observation deck with some actual rice growing out of it. The rice is now growing through the lid, and we have to routinely trim it. Okay, rainbow water snakes, anhydrous and hydrous. A lot of you are probably familiar with these, and these got a bad reputation of being really hard to keep as well, but we found they're actually one of the easiest. This is a Cambodian example. That's a wild animal. We do not get Cambodian animals in America. We get Indonesian. The Vietnamese are a little more washed out, so there is some locality variance. And there's one of our babies, and they are goofy-looking little babies. Okay, when I get to the subteniata, the care is exactly the same, so we'll just go over it there. So this is anhydrous subteniata. One interesting thing about this is they come in as anhydrous and hydrous a lot. So you have to look at your animal carefully to know which one they are. However, their care is exactly the same as the homalopsids that we just covered. Shallow water, stable environment, air sponge filter. I should know these animals all stay in the low 80s. They live in a tropical environment, so you don't need temperature fluctuations to induce breeding. They're going to do that on their own. As long as they're fed well, they will breed. In fact, there's almost no sense in doing a talk for them, breeding them. If you literally have a few, just wait. And there's one of our baby subteniata, little guy. Okay, now this was an interesting experiment. I noticed not as bad as the Bocourts, but they were chasing the fish around, unable to catch them. The fish are like, okay, cool, I'm going to stay in the open water, and you seem like a clumsy swimmer. So we decided, what about some cohabitation? When I found my first anhydrous and hydrous, I also saw what's currently being referred to as Atula mycterizans in Indonesia. Now, the mycterizans in Indonesia have tiny red eyes. The common name is big-eyed vine snake. True big-eyed vine snakes eat lizards. The ones in Indonesia on a couple islands actually eat fish. So I do not think they're the same animal. There's no similarities between them. But what's interesting is the mycterizans need the fish to be in the open water to feed, whereas the anhydrous do better if it's in close quarters. So by combining those two enclosures, which I've observed in the wild, you actually end up with these guys having better feeding response, and your anhydrous have better feeding opportunities because the fish no longer have a safe space. The open water is now dangerous from vine snakes, and under the logs is dangerous from the anhydrous and hydrous. So that kind of cohabitation benefits both animals. We also have panther crabs, neocardina, and I believe mourning geckos, just because I have so many I need to put them somewhere. All right, Bockadam. This was a hard one. We originally started with a group of 5, and we lost the first 3 within 2 months. I had been wanting Cerberus for a long time because I'd seen them in huge quantities. I had actually caught one, held it for photos for 3 days, returned to the water within about a minute. It fed right in front of me. So I thought, if there's ever been an animal built for captivity, it's this thing. It seems completely undisturbed by anything. And then I get them, and they were really difficult. Probably because I was keeping them in the traditional manner. And when it got down to just 2, I said, you know what, let's switch it up. Let's keep them like I keep the Homalopsids. Turns out they did great that way. So we are still working on this species. It is a brackish water species, but recent research by Justin Bernstein indicates that there are freshwater occurrences as well. So Cerberus microlepis, which is the Lake Buhi Bockadam, occurs in freshwater, but as he's doing genetic analysis, he's finding that Schneiderite also can inhabit freshwater. And one thing we're working on with granulatus, which I'll not be touching on today because they're record today, seems you can generationally breed them to freshwater like you do fish. So we're working on F3 granulatus that are full freshwater with no fungal issues, and that's our goal with Cerberus, is to get that brackish water element out. And you might be wondering why, but it's because they need to drink fresh water, and it's difficult to maintain that. You could create a lens, but if you change too much water, you destroy your bacteria, because brackish bacteria is not the same as freshwater bacteria. So you end up having to create a water bowl and hope they find it. Breeding them towards freshwater will make them easier for captive care. This is a Cerberus in the natural habitat. I think this was Singapore. And again, crummy water. But they do like to kind of burrow, so we have been working on pureeing fluval stratum, so it becomes more of a clay structure to see if they burrow in it. I've not seen it yet, but it's something we're trying out. And here's one in captivity. Now in this tank I do not use live plants because this tank still has salt and that tends to kill the plants, but that doesn't seem to affect them whatsoever. The pair that survived have been doing well for years now, but we've not gotten breeding out of them yet, so we will see where that project goes. But I just want to introduce you to them because they're occasionally available. I've also seen Cerberus rhinocops available, and I don't have them in my presentation simply because those don't occur in a range that, to my knowledge, is exportable, so I don't want to share an animal that I don't necessarily know is supposed to be in the trade. All right, tentacled snakes. I told you I'd talk on them briefly, and I'm also going really fast so we can have a little more lunchtime. But tentacled snakes obviously are a personal favorite. They're the one that got me into Homalopsidae. I first saw the display at the San Diego Zoo as a kid, and I said, someday I'm going to have those. A little quick side note, though. There's been some talk about the striped versus the mossy form. So the mossy form is, these are babies, so it's tough to tell, but they're the ones with kind of the blotches, and the stripes are striped. Wow, rocket science. And some folks are like, oh, it's probably different species, this, that. These came from the same mother. So one of two things could be happening here. It could be a multi-parentage. Again, you could have more than one male mate and you have babies from different parents. Or it's just a morph. My inclination is to say it's just a morph. But at the time, I was keeping my mossies and stripes together. So my next step is to separate them out and see if this occurs. So it's my suspicion this is just a pattern form or some sort of morph, but these both came from the same mother. The only difference that I can tell between the mossies and the stripes is the stripes are more expensive and a lot prettier. Sorry, mossies. Okay, so this is the original recipe. If you want, I could send you a care sheet. I also wrote a whole article in Responsible Herpetoculture about this, but this is run on a sump, obviously tannic water. I had fake plants in this colony. And here's where we're testing our new one. Now, I do not recommend yet the simplified setup for tentacles until we have long-term success. To me, long-term success is not a few months. A few months doesn't tell you much. I need a couple of years of data to go, okay, this works. So, but this is the new enclosure that we're playing around with, which is live planted, fluval stratum, leaf litter bottom. One interesting note about having a leaf litter bottom and tentacled snakes is they traditionally are the seahorses of the snake world. They anchor to a leaf, they turn their head down, they wait for something to come, those tentacles sense the water movement, and they snap them, they eat faster than anything you've ever seen. However, I've seen individuals, when you have a leaf litter, actually use a different preying mechanism where they wrap their tail around the bottom of a branch and ambush prey off those leaves. These are the kind of things you get when you keep animals that you can't normally observe in the wild very easily in a naturalistic environment. We've also noticed caudal luring in acrocord. So a lot of these environments where the prey is always available, you'll get to see what they really do in nature. And adding leaf litter showed, oh, there's another prey mechanism we didn't know about. So this is the test colony. All right, in conclusion, I'm just going to show you some video of some of our enclosures, and looks cool. And that's it. Any questions?